All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight for our history of community organizing and advocacy in the Bronx with our guest speaker, Michael Partis. We're really excited to have this opportunity to have Michael be with us tonight. This was originally planned as a post-urban plunge presentation, engaging mostly the students and student leaders who participated during Urban Plunge. But we've opened it up wide to the CCEL community and are really excited to have many students, faculty, and staff here on the call with everyone together. I'm going to briefly introduce Michael, and then I'll let him take over, and then we'll lead into a Q&A session. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask at any time, and I'm sure Michael is okay with folks dropping in questions throughout the presentation, please do so in the chat. And if you'd like to be more anonymous in your questions, please feel free to message them to me privately. I'm happy to field them on your behalf if you're interested in moving in that direction. So I'll do a brief introduction now, and then I'll let Michael take it away. So Michael Partis is the Executive Director of the Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative, a nonprofit focused on increasing shared wealth and community-based planning with working-class Bronx residents. He is also the co-founder of the Bronx Brotherhood Project, a community-based college success program for Black and Latino teens at New Settlement College Access Center. Formerly, he was the director of South Bronx Rising Together, a collective impact initiative dedicated to improving health, grade level reading, math, and post-secondary outcomes in the neighborhoods of Morrisania and Crotona Park West. And for 8 years prior, Michael led community-informed policy development and partnership at Young Movement, a New York-based grassroots nonprofit focused on social entrepreneurship. And anecdotally, Michael is also an alum of Fordham College at Rose Hill. He and I were part of the Global Outreach Program together way back when, in the mid-2000s. So he's very familiar with our programming, and we're always excited to have one of the Ramily back to present to all of us. So without further ado, Michael, I turn it over to you.
Man, when someone knows you for so long, those biographies always they hit different. Rox, thank you for the introduction. Vanessa, thank you for connecting us and making sure we were here today. And thank you all for thinking that I was worthy enough to hear me say a few things this evening. I think just to set a context really quick before I do the thing with the slides, the benefit for me in my Jesuit education was vocation. I really felt called to the work that I did. It wasn't a financial incentive, although we need finance to survive. It wasn't an ego-driven pursuit, even though we have the right to, have joy and choose what we want. But it was really a desire and a calling to have an impact and to be of service for others and, to change the society for the better. And that meant not just what I wanted to do, but that meant also being a partner, right? And being a servant leader, or being a facilitative leader, right? And so that framing, everything you heard in that biography through what we're gonna outline on these slides today, in my career and what's happening in the community, I think that framework was important. And being a part of the community, the Engaged Learning Center and global outreach and those things deepened my sense of that. And so, the world is different. You all have nicer dorms, wink, wink. But you all are going to college in a pandemic, which I didn't experience. And so I want to just say that, there's another side, there's another side and there's work to be done. And that you all, feel when you feel called and when you feel it, listen closely to it because all of those things are important and we need you out here. So with that framing, let's get into the nuts and bolts of it. So I'm going to share my screen. and I'll share from the beginning. Can you all see in full screen? So I am, among all the things in the bio, I am also a researcher for the Bronx African American History Project at Fordham University. That project is housed in the Department of African and African American Studies. A lot of my intellectual foundation came from there. And a lot of the research that I'm going to share revolved around community organizing. It revolved around what are local people doing to solve their own problems. It's worth saying twice. What are local people doing to solve their problems? And from that kind of perspective, which is that local people are solving their own problems, local people are active in solution creation. One, it changed the way that I thought about challenges or problems, right? It changed the way I thought about those challenges and problems in that I didn't take a deficit perspective. It wasn't, oh, the people of the Bronx don't know how to read, or they don't have financial literacy, or they don't understand the importance of education and of getting a college degree, or they don't. It wasn't a deficit model, right? It nuanced our understanding. When you see people fighting and striving and persisting, you begin to look at the challenges or problems differently. And so an academic education provides that. And the Bronx African American History Project, which is right there, the Center for Community Engaged Learning, which you all are a part of, Urban Plunge, these kind of experiences are fundamentally orientating you towards that, right? To do the analysis and see that we need to be partners, because the problem is not in people, the problems are in systems and institutions. So the second piece is that if that's how you see problems, then the research for best practices or resilience or persistence needs to be with the people, right? Like you need to actually be an experience. You need to go have these learning experiences and talk to folks to really understand social change or improvement or the highest ideal, I think, for all of us, which would be justice, right? Your sense of justice has to be rooted from what you see and what you hear and what you experience and the kind of partner you are with others. And so those relationships, you do it in research. So you sit in, the library, you go to class and daily, you do all those things. But my orientation as a researcher, like you heard, as an academic, I'm a trained anthropologist and I taught at the City University of New York for 8 years. But my career is around that. And so I hope that perspective comes out. The first place is that my story and the story for today of community organizing and advocacy, it's rooted in community. And what you see in front of you is United Bronx Parents. So I was born and raised in the South Bronx. I was born in Lincoln Hospital. But there's something really unique about my early childhood education. My early childhood education was I was able to go to a daycare, which functioned like a preschool. Very early on, from 2 years old, I was able to go to a daycare. But I want you all to get this, the point is really important here. A daycare that functioned like a preschool. And why that was important is because the preschool was called United Bronx Parents Daycare. And it was founded by Evelina Antonetti. Evelina Antonetti was a Puerto Rican community activist. She was a trained attorney and PhD. And her, along with other Puerto Rican activists and organizers in the Bronx, demanded educational equity in the mid-1960s. And for them, what did educational equity mean? And you can see Evelina right here on the left. You can see her standing in front of 888 Westchester Avenue. 888 Westchester Avenue, right here on the right side, is the 2 and 5 train. So you'll see Evelina here. And educational equity, what did it mean at that in the mid-1960s, coming out of the civil rights movement, the Black freedom struggle? It meant 2 things. One, it meant community-controlled education. It meant community-controlled education. How can parents and families be a part of making the decisions of leading the schools? And it was an important perspective, right? That there are a lot of things that people from outside can provide, right? Whether it's resources or knowledge. No one person knows everything. No one group has everything. So partnership with folks is important, but the people inside of a community have the right fundamentally to lead, have the right fundamentally to make the decisions about the institutions that exist in their neighborhoods and the institutions that they participate in. So equity was about parents and families and community members controlling the local school system, not to move away from expertise, not to move away from technical assistance or resources, but that the people the closest to the result, the people who are fundamentally involved, should be the ones making the decisions. This was a perspective and paradigm that came out of the civil rights movement, the Black freedom struggle, the activism of the Young Lords and others in the South Bronx. And so what Antonetti represents, right, is a coalition of folks that wanted to manifest it in education. And so they fought for PS 89, which is the school, you can't see it in there, but it's right across the street on Reverend James Polite Boulevard. They fought for PS 89 and PS 52 to be fully bilingual schools, for those schools to have the wraparound resources like food during the summer, right? Food during vacations. A lot of you are college students and you'll know that you don't stop being hungry because you're on vacation, right? There's still needs. And if you think about the K-12 system, we provide school lunch when kids are in school. Why do we think when they're not in school that those food needs go away? And so Dr. Antonetti and similar folks like her, that was their thinking, that was their orientation. And so they fought for those things. Parents, families should make the decisions, because if they did, the solutions like I just mentioned around year-round food access would be not only a priority, it would be how the institution runs. The second piece for educational equity that these folks held very early was early childhood education. Right? The idea that in order for children to develop socially and to maximize their ability cognitively, that learning needed to happen early, and that it could happen in a culturally relevant and but yet free and competent sort of way. Now, this is important because in our society today, we often talk about early childhood education as if we just started thinking about it. You know, it didn't just happen when de Blasio became mayor. It didn't just happen when people decided to put money into early childhood toys and baby Einstein. And even that's old now if you follow that field, right? You know, if you think about even early Sesame Street, if you all are familiar with that, that idea of early childhood education is rooted in Black and brown communities, urban ones at that. It's rooted in Black and brown communities, this idea of early childhood education. And so the second piece was that parents and families should make the decisions because they are the closest to the result and have a right to not only decide and lead. But the second piece that Antonetti and others like her said, that early childhood was important. And so even with the Head Start legislation of the 1960s in Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society, folks like Antonetti actualized that quickly to make the building, you can't see it in full, but to create a daycare that serviced young people ages 2 to 5. So all the way into first grade, you will be able to get an education, a full day educational experience at United Bronx Parents at 888 Westchester Avenue. So this is really important that, one, coming out of the civil rights movement, right here in the Bronx, not 50 miles away from where you all are at school, but right here in the Bronx, migrant populations like Puerto Rican activists who are part of urban social movements like the community control movement, like the civil rights movement, Black freedom struggle, that they were able to organize to create the things that they need, and that the issues that they fought for, like education, and that the things in education that they fought for, like early childhood education, that this is a longitudinal sort of thing. And it's also important that when you hear, and you might, hopefully you don't, but when you hear these things like, we don't value, Black and brown communities don't value education. The kids don't want to go to school. People don't want to do this and that. I hope this example fights off that paradigm, right? It fights off that narrative that, oh, they don't want it. I mean, this is a clear example. And this daycare, by the way, still is here today. You could go to 888 Westchester Avenue, and you will see the building and the services still being provided. So that's one example of community control of Black and brown leadership that happens right in the South Bronx that I wanted to highlight today. And that are organizing and advocacy orientation. Not only did it create a topic for people to fight back against, but it created something that people wanted to fight forward for. They said, we want control of the school, and here's the structure. And even more than that, we want a school. So we're going to make a preschool. How is that a continuation? How is that longitudinal? How is that historical? Well, by the mid-1970s, there's a second piece in the Bronx that I wanted to highlight. So CUNY Hostos Community College. Hostos Community College is a 2-year college, public university in New York City, in the South Bronx, right off 149th Street. Now, at the same time that you had the very energy that I talked about, you have the Young Lords and Puerto Rican activists, Latinx activists organizing for equity and control. You have Black community, right, arguing for Black liberation and Black freedom. You also see the demands, and institutions are popping up. It's not just a campaign on social media. It's not just a protest, but they are demanding that institutions and structures are built. Now, if Antonetti and the activists demanded that an early childhood learning center was created, these activists also demanded that higher education would be created. And so in the mid-1960s, in 2 neighborhoods, one is in Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn, and we show Brooklyn a little love, in Bedford-Stuyvesant, there was the creation of Medgar Evers College, and Medgar Evers is another 2- and 4-year college hybrid, a rarity in New York. Public 2-year and 4-year college in Bedford-Stuyvesant in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, named after the Mississippi NAACP leader, Medgar Evers. And Hostos, very similarly, named after a Puerto Rican revolutionary, is the 2-year college in the South Bronx, made to service the community, one, as a pathway to higher education. Somebody wanted a 4-year degree. But second, to be able to connect people to the skills that they need to enter the job market at a higher wage and income immediately. I'm going to say that again, right? Hostos Community College is named after a Puerto Rican revolutionary to reflect the community's demand for, one, a pathway into 4-year higher education, and 2-year education that will give them the skills that they need to access jobs, employment, and other economic opportunities, which have higher wage and income. So the community demanded this. You see institutions built. We're talking a 10-year span between 1965 and 1975. You see early childhood education sprout up. You see a college sprout up. And even if you pause for a minute, we're demanding free college, but are we demanding a people's college, right? Is that a part of the conversation that we're having now? History shows that those are the things we should be demanding. Those are the things that we should be organizing around. And even further than that, the free part, that when this CUNY opened, it was 0 tuition. It was a 0 tuition university. Why? Because the demand was that not only do we need these things, but it is our right. It is our right to have this education. We talk about access now, right? No Pell Grant, right? No FAFSA you have to fill out, but it is a right to have an education that puts us on a pathway to economic success. Now, the challenge is you probably see a banner, right? You see a banner right here, and for all the things that I just articulated about hostos, the 1970s saw a very similar socio-economic moment to what we have right now in 2020 in the United States. And that moment is what we call a fiscal crisis, a budget crisis. So at that time, in the mid 1970s, New York City was in a hundreds of $million deficit. And in a deficit, the argument was we need to budget, right? And we need to make it balanced. And second, how do we balance that budget? Well, not only do we have to charge tuition at these colleges, we got to close them because the colleges are expensive. You got to pay the staff. You have to pay to keep the lights on. You have to pay. So in a moment after communities are demanding equity and get institutions built, we're talking less than 10 years. Hostos is built and people are trying to say, let's close it. Not just, charge tuition, but close it completely. And so I'll just go back. What you see is the organizing and activism to say, no, you all, and this, who's the you? We're talking about political leaders, legislators, folks like that. At this time, we're talking about John Lindsay, Abraham Beam, these political leaders. Cuomo, not the sons, plural, the father, right? Folks like that making the argument that we need to balance these budgets and we have to close these colleges. And so how do the people organize? The people organize, and you can see it even right here in the sign. This building belongs to Hostos Community College. But what does it mean? The building belongs to the people because this is the people's college, right? The purpose of this college is to serve the residents, the populations of these South Bronx communities. It is their right and they own it. And how does one confer ownership is through possession. And we see this clearly, right? Everything in the housing debates of today, where we have squatters' rights and resistance in that sort of way, to control. And what does it mean to own and hold on to something? The people say that we are going to confer our ownership and possession by staying in the college. So you see one strategy here through protest is by, one, branding that this is our college, and two, by occupying it, phrases you maybe have heard before, but or more recently, in our society. But the point is that this is a people's college. And if it goes away, what will be the higher education institution that will serve the people of the South Bronx? Where is the solution to that? And there was none. And so the people resisted. Now, you could take it as a financial case, right? Well, if you don't have the money, you can't keep the thing open. You could take it as a short-term case. Oh, well, close it now and open it back later. But if you take it from a human rights kind of perspective, and even if you take it from a logical kind of justice perspective, what happens when we close schools in neighborhoods? I mean, you all are mostly of voting age now. And it's been a remarkable set of things in the United States to have absentee ballots and early voting. That's been a fight in of itself. But before we even had access to those things at that level, voting happened at the local poll, and a majority of the local polls in the United States are where? Schools, K-12 institutions. A public school is more often than not your polling site. And so you got to start following the bouncing ball, right? If you close schools, if you close public schools in neighborhoods, one, where will kids have to go to be educated? Probably further, but even more so for the sake of democracy, where will people go to vote? When you close a school, are you also creating another one or another polling site? And the answer is no, right? We don't hear that side of the equation often. You can watch any Netflix documentary, Amazon Prime, MS, I don't care what you listen to, right? But you don't see that side of the equation. The same people who want to balance the budget don't want to balance the social part of this when you close the school. So the people organize, back to a very kind of straightforward thing here. The people organize, and you see them organize in different ways. The previous slide showed the more activist tint, but even look at this, right? The Save Hostos Marathon, 1976. What will be there? Speakers from the community, musical bands, show, and cultural acts. Look at the latter three things. A band to play music, shows, performance art, and cultural acts, art. Now, it's important for, and I think especially for us, to understand that even in these hyper political struggles, that the popular engagement was important. And how do you popularly engage people? Art, performance, music, right? And as much of an academic as I am, and as much as I love books, and I got like a little reading list here, and as much as I admire, you know, you can't see it behind me, but Baldwin and Langston Hughes are behind me, to the point I named my children after them. We have to also understand that the oldest art form, the oldest modes of teaching and learning come from performance. They come from art. They come from building social relationships that are about joy, that are about happiness, that are about celebration, even in tragedy. The Greek root of tragedy in comedy, right, is kind of ironic. And, you know, I'm sure that you still have the core curriculum, so you've been through that. Well, oh, wait, you all are freshmen? No, we got a mixed group. All right. Well, some of you have been through core curriculum already, so you have that experience in the canonical text. So you see folks here to the point, when they say Hostos, not only did the coalition engage in activism that might seem familiar to us, right? Protest, demonstration, and banners, and this thing. But I want the little thing about, and this is a real life flyer, obviously, not a mock-up. The real life thing that I wanted to point out here is that there was also a need for popular engagement to make a bigger tent, to bring folks into that kind of organizing and praxis, and that art and other aspects were a part of it. The resolution is that Hostos is still here. So you can still go to 149th Street and Southern Boulevard and see Hostos Hostos Community College. Hostos is still here. Now, if those folks did not fight for that, what would be different? What would be changed? What would we not have? And when we have these education equity debates today, as I close out this education piece, as we have those educational equity debates today, it's the same kind of questions. When you don't have early childhood education, what happens? When you make it only on a screen, what is lost? When you close a school, what else do you lose? And so I hope those are the type of critical questions that you all engage with and think about as well. I want to leave time for Q&A, and I'm up against the clock. I'm just gonna, there's two, let's get into the present, or more present at least. Two other examples here. So one is the Kingsbridge Armory. The Kingsbridge Armory is probably less than 5 miles away from you all. Kingsbridge Armory, the short story is in the early 2000s, in the Bloomberg administration, there was an effort to redesign the armory. The armory was vacant, right? Armories are used for military purposes to literally hold armor. It was not used for that anymore. For about 80 years or so, it had laid underused. And the argument in the Bloomberg administration is that unused property is a bad thing. Unused real estate is a bad thing. And it was a bit intuitive to people, actually, because, yeah, if we need schools, if we need storefronts, if we need a clinic or a hospital, why would we have, if we need housing, of course, why would we have real estate and land that is unused when the community has so many things it could be used for? That intuitive logic, right? That deductive logic that said, yeah, that makes sense, let's build, was used for what purposes though? the Kingsbridge Armory was an example of the state, and in this point, we mean the Economic Development Corporation of New York, made a decision that the armory would be developed, and the primary development, the primary way that this armory would be used is to create an ice skating rink. Now, it's a bit of a conundrum, and I'm in a hint of what to come. In a moment when schools are rapidly being closed, in a moment where the housing crisis of New York City is deeply acute, the Bronx has the highest homeless population, right? Why are we building the ice skating rink? Kind of seems like a mismatch of needs. One step back, who decided that there would be an ice skating rink? How did that decision come about? And so policy and legislation so often will make decisions without people. And you begin to see what we were fighting for in the 60s and 70s was what? That the people closest to the result, the people who will be participating and a part of any institution, organization, system, process, that those people need to do more than participate. They need to make the decisions and they need to share in leadership because this is for them. The Armory showed that that was not a popular belief in our society. As elected officials with influence and power, as policymakers in these public-private partnerships, decided what the community needs and said, you need, or the smartest thing for you to do with this real estate was to build an ice skating rink. So here's the short story. The short story is what you see below. CARA, the Kingsbridge Armory Redevelopment Alliance, was a coalition of grassroots groups, CBOs. A CBO is a community-based organization, as well as local residents that said, fundamentally, not only are we fighting back and saying, well, we don't want an ice skating rink, like that's not the thing to build here, but also fight forward. This is what we want in the Kingsbridge Armory. And this is an important thing, right? Just like Antonetti said, we're gonna fight back the narrative that our community doesn't care about education. We're gonna fight back the paradigm that outside people should make the decisions for us who live here and work here and do and are part of this community. The same way that the activists to save hostels fought back and said, how can you destroy and eliminate a higher education institution? And the same way they fought forward and said, we made one and now we're going to save one and keep it here. You see a repetition, right? We're now in, so this is in the 2000s. This picture is from 2011. Community saying, fight back. You can't tell us what to do here. We don't need an ice skating rink. But fight forward. What do we need here? What is the community vision? How do we begin to stop these things? And so there's a lesson, right? We need to say what we want and fight to build the thing. And the Kingsbridge Armory was an example of folks saying, yeah, that we need to organize to fight back, but we also need to fight forward. And so fight forward is, and the Armory right now is still in the battle, actually. I think we heard in the next few weeks that we'll possibly hear about what's the next plan for how the Armory will be utilized. But, you know, I think it's important perspective, pardon, for you all to keep in mind that if we're still fighting these same issues and patterns, you know, what needs to change? The benefit of you all as students, right, and younger people is, you know, you have some space to think about that, analyze that. It's obviously not people. People been fighting and organizing before we were born and continue to into this day. Maybe it's not people that's solely the problem here. Maybe there's something systemic or structural occurring. Close out. Let's close out real quick. So this is a picture of the West Bronx. It's right off of Jerome Avenue. Now, Community Board 7 has about 100,000 people. Community Board 7 is about 100,000 people. Community Board 7 had one open bank. That was Amalgamated Bank. I think I saw in the chat somebody said they heard about this, so good. One bank for 100,000 people, almost 100,000 people. One bank. You know, you all are smart. I don't have to go on and on about this. That's a problem, right? Why is a community like the West Bronx so underbanked? One bank for 100,000, approximately 100,000 people. This is a response from an organization, or excuse me, an initiative called JARC, J-A-R-C, JARC, J-A-R-C. What does JARC stand for? Jerome Avenue Revitalization Coalition. JARC is the Jerome Avenue Revitalization Coalition. And so the members of JARC, which is a combination of small businesses, community-based organizations, nonprofits, and institutions who wanted to economically develop the West Bronx, the members came together and said, whoa, there's a big problem here. If Amalgamated closed, we don't have any bank. The only other bank was a Chase, and the Chase has been closed since 2019. Chase is a commercial big corporate bank. Amalgamated is a small community-minded bank. Perhaps the small community-minded bank should explain why is it closing in this community. So Amalgamated has made a commitment to reopen and service the Bronx. But I think there's something really profound here that I want you all to grapple with. What is the banking system? What is the financial system of our society where without these activists, without these community members of JARC organizing, would we even know that almost 100,000 people don't have a bank in their neighborhood? I'm going to frame this again. It's important. Without the residents and community members of JARC, would we even know that it was possible that 100,000 Bronxites would not have a bank, that these folks would lose their bank? And furthermore, what does it say? Oh, how do we understand, rather, a financial system where something like this could happen? It wasn't a community member saying, I don't want no bank, right? That was not happening, obviously. So again, is the problem with people? Is the problem with these neighborhoods? Oh, they don't recognize finance. They don't want to save their money. You know, those kind of narratives. Is that what's happening here? Or is there a systemic and structural thing that is happening here? Because to me, I see people who want a bank. Now, what kind of bank do they want? What kind of financial system do we want? What kind of thing are we fighting for? You know, that's the stuff that we have to grapple with. And so for me, I'm going to stop sharing just to close out, and then we can maybe take some questions. So for me, and what I think is critical as a takeaway here is really that people are saving themselves, and they've been saving themselves in a place like the Bronx. They've been organizing, they've been advocating, they've been activists, they've used education, they've used higher education, they've used community learning, they've used popular engagement like art. They've done it all to solve their own problems, to fight back, and to fight forward. I don't think there's a deficit of community here. But there is something systemic, there is something structural, that the same type of problems keep popping up, that the same type of challenges pop up. In the 1960s, you had, you know, Antonetti. Yeah, Evelina Antonetti. In the 2020s, wow, we are saying 2020s now. In the 2020s, You have community members maybe weren't even alive then, don't even know who Antonetti is, but having to take up the same fight to save the armory, to make sure that we are not underbanked in the West Bronx. So I don't know if community is the issue, right? We've been many generations through. Maybe community is not the problem. Maybe maybe poor people are not the problem, but maybe poverty is the problem. Maybe the racial wealth gap is the problem. Maybe it's a white supremacist framework that is the problem. Maybe it's not the people who just working hard every day to pay their bills. The people taking the time outside of whatever personal things they have to organize, to open a preschool, save a higher education institution, utilize a armory in the way that they want, and now to have a bank. Not to have $1 million, but to just have a bank. Maybe the problem is in systems. And maybe us, as folks in a college and in a learning environment committed to vocation, one that believes in facilitative leadership and servant leadership, maybe our role is to think about that systems piece, think about that structure piece, and say, how can we be engaged enough to be a partner with this generation's Angelita Antonetti? Not to be saviors of anybody, because people saving themselves. So from my orientation, from being born and raised in the Bronx, but being educated at Fordham, being at the Bronx African American History Project, the Center for Community Engaged Learning that I was with prior to these names and still with to this day, that's how I came to this. And everything in that bio, everything you heard, landed to this. And so I hope it gives some perspective for you all in what you're walking with, because I'm still here, Rox is still here, what you're walking to. People in these neighborhoods are doing the things for themselves and with a certain framework. How can I be a partner? How can I be of service? Because, you all need it for sure. So I hope that made sense. I'll pause. Rox, you want to take questions? You want me? How do you want to do it?
I can help facilitate that. So if folks have questions, feel free to turn on your videos and we can be more in a dialogue with one another. And you can raise your hands virtually with your systems, and I'll try to call on everyone in order as you're coming up. But you can also throw things in the chat. I think, Michael, there's one in the chat right here. How do you think a community can utilize technology to expand the access of education for themselves in times like this, even if it cannot recreate the original experience? What are the essential aspects that must be preserved in community engaged education?
Sorry, I was muted. So how can we use technology in education? I mean, I think that one is pretty straightforward these days, right? We have no choice. Well, some of you look like you're in a dorm, I guess, but most of us are doing the Zoom thing. I think the point of using technology is really around accessibility. And this is something we've struggled with for a long time. One of the downsides to many of those public school buildings in New York City is that they were not made for people with accessibility needs. Whether that may be, and there's a deep ableism. So whether you could walk upstairs or stand for a long time, those structures were not made for that. The second way you see it is not only some of the buildings and housing, but literally NYCHA, the public housing, the New York City housing, public housing has those issues. So the benefit of technology is that until we fight for more accessible kind of structures, this can close the gap. And often in education, I experienced this a lot when I was at South Bronx Rising Together. And we were trying to solve for why kids didn't come to school. And there used to be all these things about technology fixes, like alarm clocks, or you need to have a campaign so if you don't feel like going, they could go. And I would put up signs in Dollar Tree I would put up signs at the local bodega. I would put up signs in like a marketing campaign. But when you actually talk to families, it would be really simple things like, on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, I stay with my grandparents because my mother and father work overnight. And my grandparents live really far away. And my grandpa can't wake up early and get us there. So that's why on Mondays and Wednesdays, I'm either late or don't come. Or when it's inclement weather like snow, they don't shovel my sidewalk well. And since they don't shovel it well, and my mother's pregnant, she can't take the risk of walking on icy ground. I can't take the risk. She doesn't want me to go by myself. So that's why we don't come to school on those days. So we began to see, whoa, like, all these other explanations we have for why kids don't come to school, very different. And so the point I'm trying to make with the technology piece is that our accessibility challenges, technology can help solve. But the other piece is that you still need the infrastructure for it. The Wi-Fi signals, the ports that you need, the type of the devices. We need all of that. So I think the technology is a good piece, but we have to think about the other parts. In terms of what are the essentials for preserving community engaged education? I mean, music still works on Zoom, it might be very difficult to get somebody who doesn't use FaceTime to start using FaceTime, but it could be done. Many of the things that we thought couldn't be done, we've been forced to do it. For better and for worse, order our food, get groceries delivered. There's still gaps and there's still challenges, but I think we can do community engaged education and technology. But some of the examples about the access and other pieces, I just hope that the critical thinking, ask folks, and then you'll get the answers. Don't just presume.
I see Noreen's hand. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. First, I just wanted to thank you so much for speaking with us. The work that you've done is so inspiring. So thank you for speaking with us. But also, I just wanted to ask, like, with the Bronx's history of like the fires and then urban renewal, like, how do you really like integrate like the phenomenon of like generational trauma that's so alive like today in like community-based like organizing and just work in general?
This is a real thing. So thank you for your question. I think first and foremost, here's something we have not addressed well enough during the pandemic. And that's the need for trauma-informed care. I mean, what are we at now in the United States? Like 200,000 people have passed away. I'll tell you something that's troubled me deeply and why this is an argument for why we need trauma-informed care. I have not heard employers and I have not heard the educational system speak about bereavement or grieving. And just to, bereavement would be the time off that one needs to heal from the loss of a family member or significant other. And grieving is the period after that no matter what somebody will go through. What is the support to give people bereavement and to support people through grieving? If over 200,000 people have passed away, that's an incredible number of other people who have been affected. Where is our trauma-informed care? What if somebody in their family, and forget the numbers of people infected, we in the millions, all right? I mean, you know what's happening with political leadership and health system and them people. But tremendous amounts of people being affected, and we don't talk about bereavement. We don't talk about healing. And we've thought a lot about this and what kind of groups that we need. So trauma-informed care, I think, is something very critical. And I actually have hope that your generation, you will be the folks that really deepen that in all parts of our society. Because the corporate logic fights really hard against trauma-informed care. The corporate logic is work until I don't know what. You just, work yourself to nothing. And quite frankly, even some of our more toxic explanations and models of leadership is this tireless sort of work, and you work yourself to whatever. So trauma-informed care, I think, is the one particular thing that came to mind immediately, that we need to get certificates. We need anybody entering the educational system to have training, and we need this thesis. People are going to write those things on that. It is profound. And COVID, I think, amplified that to me, that all these people are suffering with, whether it's the isolation that quarantine provides or sickness and death, and we have no infrastructure for that. It's just hurry up and reopen to go back to work. Like, there's something real profoundly kind of like problematic about that. So I hope y'all the solution to that. And me, push me to tell me what I could do. I've been giving my staff like mental health day, like blackout day, no meetings. Let's just like reset, giving each other grace. Do that for each other, demand it of others, including your professors and leaders. Sorry, other folks want to ask something?
Any other questions? Amelia.
Yeah, so I think the examples that you provided of like activism in the Bronx in the past really kind of show like grassroots organizers like tackling like real life everyday problems, kind of like with a vision to the larger systems that are at play. But I'm wondering, I guess, how you envision community members, marginalized people, really like getting into systems and undermining those, whether it's from the inside or outside, and like, I guess, where that's happened specifically for the Bronx in the past and where you see that going in the future.
Sorry, I said that's a tough question. So this is what I'll say. Take a place like the Bronx. The Bronx has a GDP of $44 billion. The gross domestic product, the amount of money that circulates the Bronx in business, right? In business that's done, it's $44 billion. By example, that would be the equivalent, or that'd be greater than a state like Wyoming, a state like Vermont. So literally the Bronx as an economy is comparable to states in this country. Here's the second point. That $44 billion GDP is matched up against the poorest congressional district in the Bronx, right? In the country. So literally the Bronx has a gross domestic product. It does business. It has money circulate on par with a state, but it also has the poorest people by income in the country. So how do you get Bronxites to capture more of that $44 billion? I am not going to be the person to sit up here to say that's not a worthwhile pursuit. You shouldn't be thinking about how to capture that $44 billion. You need to be burning down the system. Like, I'm not going to be that person, because what I am going to say is that somebody got to feed people. Somebody got to buy clothes. Like, there's a system that exists. And if there's $44 billion in a place that has the poorest people in the country, it is a worthwhile endeavor to say, I need to redirect some of that money to these folks, or that I need to empower these folks and create ways where they capture more of that, because they're working. It's not for lack of work, Equal to that, the second part is that if we've been facing the same problems for 50 years, something wrong with that system, right? The popular kind of phrase over and over again is insanity or whatever. So something's wrong with that system. And just as much as there is to say that we want to capture what exists to utilize it for people, I think even more so there's something to say that we need something new. And so, in my organization, and you could Google it, or I could after it or whatever, tell you what it is. But in our organization, we talk about community wealth. And so that's what are the strategies that local people not just work to get income, but own and develop assets so that way they have wealth. In this system that exists, you need that. But in the new system, there will be room for people not just to work for income, but to have ownership. And so we talk about cooperative and social enterprises, and we can get into that. But my basic answer is that to take the resources that exist and redirect them into the hands of the people who need it the most is absolutely important, as is to be sharp enough and critical enough to understand that a system that reproduces problems over and over again is a flawed one, and perhaps we need something new. So, holding two opposing ideas in one's mind at the same time and trying to act can be a difficult thing. Everyone from Eliot, Hemingway, and after that has said that. But human life is not easy. Y'all are younger. So, you get to the game and develop your analysis on what you want to do. Rox, we at time, but if you want to leave space, I'll take a few more, or kick me out. You're in charge. I'm serving.
No. I think we'll have time for one more question if that's okay with you. And of course, if folks need to leave, it is 7:30 now. And please don't feel that you need to stay if you definitely have other appointments. But we'll take one more question if someone has one on their mind.
Ask anything.
Disagree with me. There's one question that's come through the chat. You've talked a lot about vocation and calling through this. It's how you started your presentation. What do you have to say, especially to the younger folks on this call who are examining their calling, their vocation, and especially their place as Fordham students here in the Bronx, and how they might live that calling here, but also back home, wherever they're headed after this or are currently, because of pandemic times, currently situated at home. So what would you have to say about expanding on your ideas of calling and vocation?
I'll just give you the personal answer for me. My favorite parts of the Bible actually is the Old Testament. Problematic, but the Old Testament, I think, has some, when I need something to pin me or anchor me into the future and keep me moving, the Old Testament speaks to me a lot. And so I try to hold two things for myself. I try to always maintain the faith of a mustard seed, right? No matter how small or how tiny or how bleak, I really try to hold on to faith that the world will be better and that we should do better and that there is better in front of us. Whenever things get hard, I just always try to hold on to my faith, as small as a mustard seed and beyond that. And, for me, the other thing is I really try to, I just try to do God's work. And for me, God's work is really about a thriving community of people that work together. Any of the lessons that I thought about come from people in their absolute refusal because of ego or because of hubris not working together. And I use those things to keep me going, because I've been on an interesting kind of faith journey. And even if you ain't on a faith journey, I guess the other way to put it too for me is my calling at Fordham came honestly from people nudging me to do things that I didn't want to do. One of my best friends is my son's godfather, and I met him at Fordham. And I was the vice president of Advocacy my junior year, my sophomore year, but I didn't want to be. We was just sitting. Hurricane Katrina had just happened in the United States. Kanye West was a hero. There's a whole different world universe, right? And we were talking at an Advocacy meeting right there in McGinley on the second floor. I don't know if they still let you have the couches up there and everything, but we were talking and like, man, like abandoned Black people, what's gonna happen? And somebody said, well, what are you going to do? Like, you have a critique, but like, what are you going to do? And I said, yeah, I don't know, right? What am I going to do? And my friend Kevin, after that, said, you should run for vice president. We need a vice president. Like, this is your chance to do something. I was like, nah, I'm good. I'm not interested in running. I didn't come here to run for anything. But that nudge from, the person who said, what are you going to do, to your friend saying you should do it, people nudging us into uncomfortable things is pretty important. And, talk about these repetitions. The only reason I became president of Asili my senior year was because I was like, I'm too busy. Like, I need to take care of my family and figure out what I'm doing when I'm gonna graduate. Like, it sounds like it's a mess here. I'm good. And friends and people like, no, you should do it. Like, you should do it. You should think about it. Sometimes a gentle nudge into something uncomfortable, is important. And when you have people with you who care about you, when you have people who are, in the same kind of environment, that nudge can be important. And so from going to preschool at, Evelina Antonetti, going to United Bronx Parents Daycare, being nudged into that, my family being nudged into that's the right preschool, to, your friends nudging you into leadership or servant leadership or whatever. I guess that's how I ended up here. But regardless of which, I think those were important things. So don't be afraid to nudge each other a bit, and don't be afraid to nudge yourself when you need it. Keep that faith of a mustard seed. It keeps you going. And don't be afraid to nudge. Don't push anybody over the edge, but a little nudge, it don't hurt from time to time. That's how I keep going, to be real. I don't know. I hope that means something to y'all.
Thank you, Michael. There's a couple of questions about how folks could get in contact with you. And so if you want to drop your contact info into the chat, I think that could be really helpful. And to wrap it up, I just want to say thank you to you again. I have to learn my lesson and schedule these for more than an hour because we always run into the situation. But I also know that it's late at night and you have 3 kids waiting for you. So I am grateful for the time that you give to us. I'm grateful personally for your friendship for all of these years and for always encouraging me and all of us to do better and to learn about the history that leads us into the present, right? And to always have that context as we look to what's happening into the future of what we want to do. And so thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it. And to everyone who was on the call, much love and thanks to all of you as well. This will be available for you to view again or to share with friends who couldn't make it tonight on our blog and our web pages soon. So thank you again, and keep in touch with the Center for Community Engaged Learning for future programs. Thanks and have a good night, everyone. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Christy Bell, thank you. I see you. All right, I got you. I'll hit you. All right, bye, y'all.
Thanks, Michael. Vanessa, you can turn off the recording. Yep.
Yep.